Welcome everybody to our final plenary session of the afternoon. Before we hand over to our final keynote speakers. Now in this session I want to do a brief introduction on how the new environment affects transaction tax. Then I'm going to talk about substance and management and control of holding companies. Then I'm going to hand over to Laurent from Taxand France. Now Laurent led the global Taxand team on what was one of the largest and most complex transactions in Europe over the last couple of years. And during that section, we're going to hear from Abhishek on the Vodafone case and how that affected our structuring. And then a bit more from me and from Meral on some of the local carve-out issues we had in the UK and Turkey. But first, I want to reflect on the new environment and what it means for M&A tax. As you heard earlier from Keith, taxpayers are coming under much more scrutiny from governments, from tax authorities, and from the public. Now, a lot of my work is in private equity, and private equity is not new to a certain amount of scrutiny and controversy. Going back 5 or 6 years, we had the infamous locust analogy from Germany. In the UK, we also had a stunt where the unions paraded a camel outside the church of a private equity executive on a Sunday with the slogan that you see up there. Now these protests weren't necessarily focused at tax planning, but things have moved on. In the UK, we are having protests against companies which are seen as undertaking aggressive tax planning, or indeed not paying their fair share of tax. Some of those scenes that Angol just described that he saw of his son, and these are some of the scenes we're seeing in the UK. Quite horrific, and I'm sure we want to avoid seeing scenes like this outside our clients, or indeed the companies we work for. Now 5 or 6 years ago, if I come up with an acquisition structure and said this reduces your tax rate to a very low figure, say 5 or 10%, invariably the clients would have said, yes please. Now, if I ask the same question, that's not necessarily the answer. It's more often how. How aggressive is this? How achievable is this? So what does this mean for us as tax advisors? Now, Keith earlier on mentioned his press cutting folder. I have a similar one, and it reminded me of an article I have in there. It was from the Daily Mail. Now, the Daily Mail in the UK is popular press. It doesn't have a very strong financial content. Even the popular press is looking at these type of issues. They ran a recent article where they counted the number of subsidiaries that major multinationals and banks have in tax havens. But they also went further. They looked at tax advisory firms and counted the number of offices that tax advisory firms have in tax jurisdictions. So I believe there's no place for purely theoretical tax planning. Tax planning needs to go hand in hand with understanding the business. Now, I was recently working on a transaction, and with some fairly aggressive structuring, I could reduce the tax rate by maybe 4 to 5%. But I was also doing the diligence on this target also, and I spent time understanding the business. I understood the supply chain, the transfer pricing, and identified an opportunity to realise a similar saving, 4 or 5% off the tax rate, by improving the supply chain and improving the transfer pricing. Now, I think this saving, the latter saving, is probably much more valuable nowadays than the first. Finally, I want to talk about substance. As you know, most acquisition structures include holding companies which are resident in jurisdictions such as the Netherlands or Luxembourg. Now, it's more key now than it's ever been, that these companies have substance, that they're actually managed and controlled in those jurisdictions. Now, when I'm advising clients on this, I often use the practical examples. Keep your travel itineraries, keep your boarding cards. And sometimes I get an odd look from the client thinking, surely the authorities won't go to that much detail. In fact, they will. There was recently a case in the UK, the Leierstatter case, and it's an interesting case. The transcript is 24 pages long. Only 2 of those pages are technical. 22 pages actually cover the facts and what happened on the ground. And I've got some examples from that case up there. The first one is the fact that they actually heard evidence in person from the director's secretary They questioned her on the director's whereabouts and movements and reviewed her diary and her calendar. The director also said, I was concerned my phones were bugged, so I didn't conduct any activity from London. Clearly that statement alone is not strong enough. You need to have hard evidence and facts to back that up. And finally, there was a board meeting, and at the hearing, the director couldn't remember if he attended. And the judge rather harshly said, if you'd broken a holiday on Easter Monday to attend a meeting in the Netherlands, surely you'd be expected to remember that. Now, there are just 3 examples. The case has many, many more, and it's quite a scary read. So the message here is you need to continuously monitor the substance of your holding company jurisdictions, particularly after the excitement of the signing and the closing of a transaction has died down. Now I want to hand over to Laurent to take us through the Taxand case study. Now we heard earlier from Richard some of the pitfalls that you can walk into when you do a global acquisition. Now because of the superb management by Laurent from Taxand France, this is a good demonstration of the opposite.
So as you can see, structures that have been implemented locally raised several complex but also very interesting issues. Well, now this is not the end of the story. We have been working hard on the carve-out, but it's really important to note that post-closing, several aspects raise tax issues that must be closely managed. Here are 3 examples. First, tax leakages that you may have on cash repatriation. In some countries, exchange control regulation require to make a cash operation, which means that you have to deal with cash to repatriate to the top of the structure, and which means also that you have to deal with tax leakage, such as withholding tax or dividend tax. Second example is the follow-up of tax ruling or discussion with local tax authorities. As you can imagine, it's crucial that you are able to provide with these local tax authorities with the same level and the same nature of information. Otherwise, you clearly have a risk to weaken your position in case of a tax audit, bearing in mind the increase of the exchange of information between these tax authorities. The third example is the tax aspect of the purchase price allocation process. This is a quite usual process in this type of large transaction. And tax may be really important here, where you wonder where and how you will allocate the goodwill between the different countries. And you know that some countries authorize the tax amortization of the goodwill, where some others don't. So it's really important to bear in mind that tax here must be closely managed. Well, I think now we arrive to the end of the presentation, and I think it's time to conclude. I think this operation has been a great opportunity and a great experience for all of us and for Taxand to work on one of the most atypical transactions of the market. Billions of euros, more than 30 countries, 2 years of work. I would say it's the kind of file you experience only once in your career, maybe 2, but not more. So we have been lucky. The key lesson I think we have learned is that global acquisition means global tax structuring. In that type of multinational cross-border transaction, it's really crucial to keep a global approach at any stage of the process. First, at the stage of the due diligence. As we saw, a tax due diligence process of a worldwide group needs to globalize the analysis and to be consistent in the risk assessment. Second, at the level of the global closing, we saw earlier that a straightforward acquisition in France may have huge tax impact in foreign countries, and that the kind of information you want to have in mind at the very early stage of the process. Third, for the local carve-out operations, we saw that structuring a worldwide carve-out may not simply be to the addition of local operation, but clearly needs to be globalized and coordinated. And I would say on the top of that, what makes this file really exciting is that it is living. Yesterday we were actually in a meeting just to discuss the Indian carve-out, and we tried to anticipate what could be the impact of a possible change in the tax regulation and securities law regulation. So you see that we need to adapt, and we cannot just freeze the structure and just live with it. And if I take the example of Turkey, which is a very good example, as Meral explained, a tax optimizing structure, I mean the full demerger, has not been implemented just because from a business point of view, it was not manageable. So that's also the proof that at the end of the day, the business always is the driver in this type of operations. Well, I hope we have been able to provide you with some key lessons for this particular very large type of transactions. The issues are complex, but I hope we have also been able to show you that the camel may effectively pass through the eye of the needle. And I do believe that Taxand has demonstrated a high level of coordination and integration to provide our client with a global approach on the tax structuring. And I want to thank all of the Taxanders here for this extraordinary job. And I want to thank you, all of you, for your attention. Thank you very much.